All right. Okay. Welcome to the UCSD Chinese Students Town Hall, organized by the 21st Century China Center at the UC San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy in cooperation with several student groups. My name is Lei Guan. I'm the center's director, and I'll be moderating this discussion today. So we're very delighted to have a great panel of student leaders, both undergraduates and graduates, my colleagues who are experts on China and U.S. China relations. Also joining us is Dulce Dorado, director from the UCSD International Students Program Office. So we will devote the first half to panel discussion, and then for the second half, we want to hear from the audience. In a true town hall fashion, we want to hear from as many students as possible, and so they can actively participate in the Q&A session. I'll also be selecting questions from the chat box. So if you can use that function to pose questions, you can do that anytime. Now I would like to turn it over to Dulce Dorado, Director of the International Student Program Office, to share a little bit about the programs and services offered by her office during this difficult time. After Dulce, we'll hear from a few student leaders who are on the panel about their experiences and concerns they have during this pandemic and their thoughts on the U.S.-China relations before moving on to the faculty panel. Dulce.
Thank you, Dr. Guang, and my colleagues over at the 21st Century Center for the invitation to join the panel and to provide information about the International Students and Programs Office. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just for my brief presentation. Okay, I hope that folks can see that. Okay. So just briefly a little bit about our office. I know that we have many students from China, and it's always our pleasure to serve and to just support our international students along their journey here at UC San Diego. And we really have a very dedicated staff of experts just on immigration advising and just also helping our students adjust to living here at UC San Diego and in the United States. An overview of our services. So since March, we've really pivoted to the remote environment, and we hope that that our students are now having more access to our services and to our advisors, but also trying to accommodate many of our students that may be overseas and have time zone considerations. So everything has been moved in terms of advising. Now we do all of our advising via Zoom, and you can see here in the first column, our website is istudents.ucsd.edu. Students can, of course, make appointments with our advisors or just join a group advising session or peruse our website for a variety of different topics. The next column is application document support. So of course, all of our students that are still enrolled at UC San Diego, whether they're here in the United States or abroad, still have many documents that they need signed or have applications for either employment authorization, such as optional practical training, OPT, or curricular practical training, CPT, or things that might involve travel or their full-time enrollment. So students, again, can do all of that online. All of those requests are available at iportal.ucsd.edu. The third column are all of our workshops and webinars. So again, we've really tried to pivot to this format so that way students can either participate live when the webinars are offered, or we record them, and then they're available then for students to review on their own. Many of our webinars, and it's on iwebinars.ucsd.edu, cover either for new students, preparing to arrive for the fall term. We have a broad range of different webinars for students planning to work in the United States, whether it's on campus or doing a summer internship, or even those that are graduating. And of course, maintaining your status and just promoting academic success. So those are the three main areas in terms of student services, and all of the URLs and websites are there. The other thing that I wanted to cover is that all of our programs, so our student engagement and experience programs, again, we've pivoted to the remote environment. You know, many of the things that we were doing before, we've moved over to remote, or we've created additional forums, again, because of what we're hearing from students in terms of what they might need support with. So our coffee hours is just an opportunity for students to get together with other students and just share their experiences. We also have ISPO chats every Friday from 8 to 8:30. The one thing that we did add is that we do have a Mandarin and also Cantonese speaking counseling and psychological services, so a counseling psychologist. And every Wednesday from 1 to 2 o'clock, she has a forum that students can participate in as well. In addition to that, we have our international peer coaches who are current international students who serve as a resource for our current students. So many of these programs are listed on iprograms.ucsd.edu. And again, it's just our way of making sure that our students feel like they're still engaged with the campus, with our students across time zones, and whether you're here in the United States or abroad. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that there are many programs on campus that really want to connect students with each other. So the globalhub.ucsd.edu iEvents has a listing of all of these programs that students can participate in. So please look at these resources. One other thing I did want to highlight is that, again, because of the global pandemic, there's been a lot of that we've been hearing from our students in terms of financial concerns and concerns about housing. So UC San Diego and the associated students and the Basic Needs Committee have provided funds for emergency and special relief that are impacting our international students. The URL is available here. So if students are experiencing food insecurity, may need some rent relief, you know, purchasing of books, that kind of thing, please utilize this resource by going to this website, and it's our iTable program, and we can connect you to those financial resources. The second program also that the campus has developed in order to meet some of the needs that our students have been expressing is summer transition housing. So some of our students who've graduated may be in transition, either trying to go home or maybe moving somewhere in the United States, but just need an opportunity to find a temporary place to stay. So housing has created this transition housing program that runs from June 15th to September 5th. And again, this URL here, students can apply for this program, and it's students that are either continuing students, those that are graduating, and even incoming students who need a transitional space are eligible for these programs. And again, these are specifically related in response to the COVID-19 situation. Lastly, what I want to leave our students with, and also just the staff that might be on the call, the campus recognizes really the challenges that many of our Chinese students are experiencing, whether it's the current regulatory climate, maybe you're concerned about your own safety, your parents might be concerned about your safety here in the United States, and of course, just making sure that you succeed academically. Here are a list of URLs or websites in which you can get additional information, whether it's advising services from the International Students and Programs Office. We also maintain actively our COVID-19 frequently asked questions page. Anything in terms of document requests, upcoming or current immigration policy updates, all of that is here. And you can see also in the yellow box here, ways that you can get information. We encourage you either to contact our office by email and filling out this form, but we're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All of our webinars, all of our workshops, the ones that are relevant to students, have been recorded, and you can go on our YouTube channel and find that information. So I hope this is helpful. And again, at the very end, if there are any questions from our students, please feel free to enter them in the chat or in the QA format, and I'll be happy to answer them after the rest of the panel has an opportunity to speak. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dulce. And Dulce will be with us for the Q&A session as well. So if you have questions, you can ask them then. Next, we would like to invite a few student leaders to share a little bit about their thoughts and their concerns. Susan and I had an opportunity to talk with several of them a couple of weeks ago. And so we thought that this is a time for them to share their experiences with you guys as well. We have 5 student leaders: Cecilia Tsai from the CSSA, Chinese Scholars and Student Association; Dylan Chen from the Chinese Graduates Association; Dong Anqi from the Chinese Union; and then finally Chao Ye and Zhang Songyue from GPS China Focus blog and China Focus Club. So without any particular order, if you could just share with us what your perspective.
Maybe I think I can go first since I'm the first one on the list.
Okay.
Okay, can I?
Cecilia.
Okay, so hi everyone. I am Xingyu Cai, and you can also call me Cecilia. I'm from Chinese Students and Scholars Association at UCSD, and I am a second-year student from ERC, and my majors are social psychology and sociocultural anthropology. So our association is a nonprofit student association on campus, and we mainly serve the Chinese students and scholars and at UCSD and help them to adjust the new environment in America. And also we enrich their social lives, academics, careers, etc. through a lot of interesting events on campus. And so as for some concerns that a lot of Chinese students have for now, I think the biggest one would be how they're going to spend their summer. Because as you may know that the travel restrictions between China and the US has been a very challenging thing for a lot of international students, especially from China, because it is really hard for them to buy a ticket to go back to China under these circumstances. And also even if they successfully go back to China, they also worry about like whether they can successfully come back to the United States during the fall quarter or even the winter quarter. And also if they like stay in the United States during the summer, there are also very limited things they can do because a lot of like internships or other programs have been suspended. So there's also the concerns like what they're going to do in the United States, and also apart from the families from China, maybe some mental problems will also be a problem for a lot of Chinese students here. And also as for the Chinese-U.S. relationship, I think in the few days before, we can see that there are a lot of news regarding the like international flights or the international students from both of the countries. So I think it is not very surprising to see some disagreements or like conflicts between the two nations during this pandemic, since a lot of things has been changed and a lot of differences between the two nations have been reviewed. So obviously due to the coronavirus. And I also think that the worsening relationship between the two countries will last for a longer time, even after the pandemic end. So I think for international students like us, it's a very challenging time for us because we have to do some very difficult decisions, like whether to go back to China or stay at the United States. And I think we should prepare for that as well, because as I said before, I think the trend will last for a longer time, like a couple of years maybe. So I think for us, it's also challenging, and we should prepare for us and like do some very difficult decisions as well. Yes, okay. I think that's for me.
Thank you, Xinyu. I don't know if Dylan is online. I did not see his name. Is Dylan here? If not, let's move to Anqi, Chinese from the Chinese Union.
Yeah, for sure. I can go for the second. And hi, everyone. My name is Ann Chi-dong, and I'm a sophomore majoring in economics and international business from Marshall College. And I'm also the vice president of Chinese Union. During the pandemic, I experienced and also heard a lot from my fellow international students about the well-being of Chinese students during the pandemic. Like the most common questions is about how to go back to China. Like yesterday, as the government announced, the airlines to China has been canceled. Though the announcement has been modified this morning, we cannot predict like for the further orders about the airlines from the government. Furthermore, even if we do not have the announcement about cancellation into account, it is still a hard time for us to buy our tickets back to China. The number of airlines allowed to fly to China is actually limited, which leads to a sky-high price for all of our plane tickets. And sometimes even if we get the ticket, we need to consider the risk of being canceled, which disables us to rent out our apartment or move out as soon as possible. In addition, we can never predict our future. That's like the question raising up by both continuing students and also the incoming students. Like, can we still come back to the States after the summertime? Can we still continue our study on our campus? And as the limitation of policies, Chinese students with the visa still cannot enter the US right now. Does going back mean we cannot never come back to the States to continue our study like after the pandemic? None of us can make a prediction out of that. Under all of such considerations, a lot of Chinese students are going to, or we can say to be forced to stay in the US because like they may not have anything to do during the summertime things. During the enrollment of the summer sessions, they might not like make such predictions about the pandemic, which make their life a little bit boring right now, I can say. Yeah. So I kind of like agree with Cecilia's point like before, because she said that like we need to think of something that could make like Chinese students' life better living in the US right now. And yeah, they may not have like anything to do during the summertime, as I mentioned before. So I want to raise up the question that are there any ways we can take care of the Chinese students through the aspects of their mental health, physical health, social life, academic life, identity, and career life, like at the time when they have to stay at the States. Yeah. And I think that career life is also like a great aspect for us to focus on, since a lot of Chinese students lose their internship because of the pandemics, both in the States and also in China. Yeah, and that are the questions that are raised most from my colleagues and also from myself. And about the China and US relationship, I also mentioned before. So in the end, we just hope that China and US can reach like a great relation in the future, so that the Chinese international students will not be hurt like by their like properties or priorities right now in the US, and hoping that we can reach a better life in the future. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Angie. The next, Chao Ye.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Chao, and I'm a first-year master's student at GPS. My concentration is Chinese economics and political affairs, and I'm mostly focused on Chinese politics and public policy. I'm the digital media manager at China Focus Blog, so we're actually a China-related student publication website. And we have been collaborating with 21st CCC on many events and research. So in terms of Chinese students' well-being, I think our colleagues have talked a lot about how students, like it's really hard for students to go back to China during the summer. And I think most of the Chinese students are choosing to stay in San Diego this summer. So I think there's like it can be this like possibility of organizing some online get-together activities, like for like the Chinese students staying here. And I think another problem for like mostly for incoming students is that like most of the students can't really get their student visas, and a lot of them have chosen to defer their offer to next year. So I think we probably would want to build up like this contact with incoming first year students, and yeah, so we probably wanted to like build this community before they get into the university. And also another problem that I want to address in terms of Chinese students and then how they were treated under this pandemic is that like a lot of Chinese students have encountered racist attack, and sometimes also include the use of violence. So I think it's very important to set up like mutual help groups of the Chinese community or even the Asian community. So because like when we're subjected to xenophobe, not only Chinese, but like all Asians may become victims of like misguided and false designations. So I think it's really important for Chinese students to like open up and then blend into like a bigger Asian community, to call on more Asians and let them know that not just Chinese, like not just Chinese people, are like really need to consolidate. It's like it's more about this bigger community. So I'm posting this article in terms of like racist attacks on the Asian community during the pandemic, and I think it's like very interesting. If anyone wants to read that, you can probably like dig deeper into that. So I posted that into the group chat. So like the third aspect in terms of U.S. China relations, I think like politically, like the two countries are like having like their own domestic politics issues, and then I think what we're trying to do is we should probably try to avoid the worst scenario, like where both countries would use the worsening relations as a scapegoat of their failure of dealing with like domestic political issues. And also, I think the pandemic has given a lot of people in the US who didn't have much knowledge about China previously a deeper misunderstanding on the Chinese culture. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sungyue, do you have something to add to what the other student leaders have said?
Hi, everybody. My name is Zhang Songyue, and I am like Ye Chao. I am a first-year master's student at GPS, and my concentration is also on Chinese economic and political affairs. I'm currently the president of China Focus Club at GPS, and I do have something to add about Chinese students' concern. I think many of us are reconsidering future plan in terms of working or continuing study in the United States. Some of my friends are graduating this year, and they are reconsidering the decision to apply for a job or apply for a PhD program because of the current situation. And I think one reason is that the United States have put more restrictions on the application of OPT. And also the environment in the United States is not as welcome as before. So many students are considering whether this cost is worth spending when considering the possible quality decline in international study and maybe the risk of staying in foreign country under the situation of COVID-19 and current protests all around America. So I think this is one of the concerns that I want to add. And another one is the maybe mental health of international students, because we're facing too much uncertainties in terms of academic, and we're having more pressure than domestic students because we have to decide whether to stay here or go back home, and we have to comfort our parents and our friends, and we have to focus on the study at the same time. So I think some students will face the mental health issue when they're staying in the United States alone. And about the China-US relation, I think the past week has put an excellent example about the flight regulation. This morning, US updated the regulation to a new version. The flights are allowed at the same numbers from China to US and from the US flight companies to China. So the two countries are playing like repeatedly like a business game. And I think the attitudes are turning towards each other, that we're blaming each other for both the conflict and trade in international relations, and like Yichao just mentioned, we're distracting the public from domestic issues. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And obviously the pandemic is creating a lot of problems for all of us, but for the Chinese students in particular, the increasingly difficult relationship between US and China bears a lot of influence. So to help us understand the relationship, where it is going, and how it might impact all of our lives, we have invited 3 faculty members from the 21st Century China Center to each talk about different aspects of this relationship, and very briefly, and then to also be ready to answer questions from the panelists and as well as from the audience. I've already been receiving lots of questions, so keep them coming. So first, I would like to introduce Professor Susan Shirk, who is the chair of the 21st Century China Center. And I think I'm not going to go into much introduction, and I'll let her to start this segment first. Susan.
Well, I want to thank the Chinese students at UCSD for joining us in this discussion. All of us who study China here, go back and forth to China frequently, have spent a lot of time in China, and really treasure the collaborations and the friendships that we formed over many years. And we feel a lot of personal concern for our students here at our own campus from China. And we'd like to figure out more ways that we might be able to help and support you during the summer, next year, or whatever. So obviously, the COVID pandemic has kind of tested U.S. China relations. And I think, as many of you have said, it revealed that the relationship has become not just more competitive, but even more adversarial and even more hostile. Because in the past, the two countries managed to work together on epidemics going back to SARS and H1N1, Ebola, even when they were at odds over different issues, they managed to come together and work together very well on public health common challenges. So I frankly thought that was likely to happen this time, but it clearly has not happened. And in a sense, it reveals the very unpleasant truth of how relations had already deteriorated before COVID. And now, as many of you have pointed out, I think it's fair to say that the leadership in both countries have felt on the defensive because of their own mistakes at the earlier stages of the epidemic in China, continuing in the United States, maybe even still continuing in China. And so they are taking the kind of cheap diversionary approach to try to get everybody to focus on some external enemy, if you will, or the reason that things have gone badly in our own country. And of course, this is really tragic. You know, some of you may have studied about the tragedy of the commons, you know, when we have a collective threat or a collective common good, you know, how do we get individuals and countries to cooperate instead of free riding on the efforts of other countries or individuals? Obviously, infectious diseases are global challenges. And what's really tragic about this is that we can see how the consequences of US and China failing to coordinate their efforts will definitely impede the whole global cooperation effort on medicines and vaccines, helping third world countries that are going to, developing countries that are going to be overwhelmed by the epidemic. So, you know, that's why at 21st Century China Center, we actually put together a statement about the need for US and China to cooperate to save lives, which we issued together. You can find it on our website. We got about 100 former government officials and China experts in the country to sign this letter. You know, it's a message we felt we really had to express. And so we're continuing to try to communicate that message and to encourage policymakers in both countries to overcome their domestic narrow self-interest and cooperate in order to save lives.
Great, Susan, thank you. Next, we have Professor Barry Naughton, who is an economist who studies the economic relationship and technology, and will comment on the technology and science and economic dimension of the relationship. Barry?
Actually, I'm not going to say much about it because I think it's more important for us sort of to listen right now. I guess I want to say a couple of words to our Chinese students, and that is, we value your presence here so much. And, you know, we've all been a little bit hunkered down, I think, in the last couple of months, dealing with COVID, now dealing, you know, with demonstrations and riots across the country. And yet, when I think about what you guys have to go through so far from home, it's a lot more. And I just want to say that we are very open to hearing more about what your problems are, and especially what we can do practically to help, especially this summer. And I apologize if we haven't maybe reached out more and said to people, you know, these are some of the options. You know, there is this internship option for the summer. We've been trying to build up as much money as possible to provide, okay, relatively low paid internships for GPS students at least, but we're trying to do that. Just, you know, a few words on the relationship. It's bad and it's going to get worse. But at the same time, you can see that these two great countries are trying to figure out if there are a set of principles and rules of engagement that they can follow. Right now, everybody is just obsessed with this idea that the two of us are in this competition for technological leadership. And yeah, that's true, right? That's an element of the relationship. But right now, everybody is acting as if it were 100% of the relationship. And it's not. It's 30% of the relationship. It's 20% of the relationship. And one of the things that we saw in COVID was leaders who acted as if strategic rivalry were 100%, took decisions that hurt their own country. Let's just say Donald Trump took decisions based on the idea that everything was about rivalry with China that ended up hurting the United States dramatically. And so I do think there on the other side of this extremely difficult period that's going to go on for a couple of years, there is the potential for a better relationship, even if we can't, resolve these underlying deep. There are elements of strategic competition and ideological competition, but there's also a way to get along, and you guys are going to play the key pivotal role in deciding if and how that happens. So I'll shut up and thank you.
Can I just interject for a second on this question of the, science and visas and things like that? I think it's important to let our students know that the campus, along with other universities, are really concerned about new restrictions and are coordinating our efforts to try to make the case in Washington. First of all, to kind of track how these, what we hear about this, how it will be implemented, what will be the specifics. It's not clear yet. We just don't know. And then the other thing is to make the case that it would really be a very negative thing for American universities, which are kind of the pride of America, and feel that we're the best universities in the world because they're so international, because we're open to students from all over the world. So there's a major effort underway right now to try to have whatever restrictions get imposed be as limited as possible.
Okay, great. There are a couple of questions in that on that already, but we'll get to that more later. Finally, let's have Professor Richard Madsen to say a few words, and he's a sociologist.
Well, this is a time of tragedy, really, because the U.S. China relations, as has been said, is kind of on a downward spiral. And it's in a situation where things done by one side to provoke the other then cause a counter reaction that provokes some more, and back and forth and so forth. And right now, it doesn't look too good. And we're all going to have to work to try to overcome that. Let me say a few things about, say, the American side of it, and that are causing some of the issues. From the point of view of the American grassroots, okay. On the one hand, in the United States, and especially you see it developing in the 1990s down to the 2000s, is concern about immigration, about people, especially, less educated people, working class, worried that the jobs are being taken away by outsiders. One group of outsiders being Chinese. And they see this in terms of immigration, maybe illegal for people who work in Chinatowns and so forth, but also high-end immigrants who are getting good jobs in high-paying tech industries and so forth, which are very, very important for American growth. But in any case, there's been a concern about this immigration. Another set of concerns has to do with a feeling at grassroots that American elites, business and government, are been profiting from each other. The business elites basically using China to offshore all sorts of American manufacturing jobs and to replace other jobs with robots and so forth. And benefiting each other. So this is in context of economic inequality rising very, very steadily in the United States, also in China. So now China and US each have the highest number of billionaires, for example. China has more actually than the USA, whereas there's a great, great gap in inequality. So, so there's resentment about that. There's also some religious dimensions too, with American evangelical Christians concerned about religious suppression in China, et cetera. So these are some things. And if you think about these groups, these kind of concerns, they come together under President Trump and form a key part of his coalition. And so his rhetoric, and for instance, the rhetoric that you saw a week ago when he gave a speech about U.S. China relations, basically speaks to some of these concerns among those kind of people. And it's very, very heated rhetoric, very, very passionate. And I'm afraid I can predict in the coming election season, it's going to get worse, okay? However, if you look at the remarks of President Trump and his administration at totally face value, it looks pretty bad. But I think that the bureaucracy and other parts of the administration and other parts have more pragmatic approaches, and it's not going to be, the actual policies aren't going to be necessarily as bad as the rhetoric sometimes sounds. But I think overseas students need to be aware of this and kind of hang in there, because we're in this kind of dynamic. At the same time, I think the universities are relatively good places for our international students to be. You're in a place where people truly care about you, where we have really good resources, and they've been getting better. When I was provost at Eleanor Roosevelt College, we did a lot to beef up student services, psychological services, other kind of services, and I think we were successful. We still need to go a long ways. However, there are people outside the university who see us as much as the problem as anyone else. We have many, many immigrants, you know, our faculty, a great portion of them are born overseas, and many of them from Asia now, especially in the sciences. Our students, international students, have enriched us tremendously. We benefit from all of that. And you know, overall, in terms of economic you know, well-being, we're in pretty good shape compared with other people in the country. So some people see us as a problem, and so one problem we have is speaking about this to some of the kind of people, for instance, that are part of President Trump's base. I, you know, been on some various kinds of talk shows on PBS, NPR, and so forth, and that's one experience. Somehow, some time ago, I got on, I don't know how, onto basically a right-wing talk show, and it was a very different experience, very extremely passionate, and so forth and so on. And I basically had the feeling that we university people don't speak the same language, basically. And so we have to contend with this aspect of American society, which is becoming supercharged and heated, especially with everything that's going on right now. So that's our challenge. I think I can tell the students here that we value you, and the university with all our various institutions and organizations really cares about you, and we're trying to do our best. We want to be better and hear from you about how we can be better. But as a university as a whole, we need to find some way to kind of deal with some of the issues of inequality and cultural misunderstanding and so forth, which I'm afraid are afflicting our society as a whole. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard, Barry, and Susan. So next, we would like to hear from all the students. And I have collected some questions, but for this segment, you can also raise your hand And then when we see your hand, we can go and unmute you. You can actually talk to the group, ask your questions, talk about your concerns. And so then our staff and faculty can have enter into dialogue with you. And okay, let me go to the questions that I have received, and several questions about the recent presidential proclamation about the student visas, etc. So one question is about what is new about this particular proclamation to restrict the visa of Chinese students and researchers, because there are already a lot of screening of the Chinese students, researchers in sensitive areas. Is this going to introduce more difficulties for STEM students to get a renewed visa? Is the school tracking the visa troubles, from the international scholars? So that's a question in general, and there are specific questions about connected to this presidential proclamation. That is, what can the UCSD do to help the students who may get into problems?
Maybe Dulce has some thoughts about that. I mean, my understanding is this proclamation focuses on students who are somehow connected to universities in China that work on civil military fusion. So it would be layered on top of other previous restrictions. And yes, it would make things more difficult, but it all depends how they define civil military fusion. Many universities in China have research that ends up helping defense modernization, just as the Defense Department funds research at UCSD and other universities. On our universities, none of that research is classified. We do not do classified research on American universities, basically. So I don't know in China whether or not this research is classified or not, but it really all depends what the implementing regulations will be. And we don't know that yet. And we're trying to influence that so that they are as narrow as possible, I think it's fair to say. Dulce, have any information yourself?
Yes, so I know this has really been since the release of that presidential proclamation last Friday on May 29th. I mean, this is probably one of the most commonly asked questions by many of our students. From my analysis, the major differences in terms of previous proclamations is, number one, it involves the entry of graduate STEM students, researchers, so whether they're postdocs or scholars, that may have an affiliation, both past and present, to what they're defining as military civil fusion strategy. On the calls that I've had with the Department of State, and they have these calls with different universities, they've given guidance to the embassies and the consulates about how to make that determination. But unfortunately, they haven't shared it with any of the universities or any other third party entities. So at this time, we're not sure, or we're not clear, and I think that's what you've also seen in the proclamation, that although it states that, there are a lot of ambiguities in the proclamation. So number one is, how do you determine that an individual has had past and or present affiliation, and what are those entities? There's some speculation in terms of a list of potential universities, but there are no definitive answers. The second thing that it's noteworthy in that proclamation is that it indicates that the Department of Homeland Security may revoke visas. Now, in terms of immigration terms, revoking a visa doesn't mean that you have to leave, because if a visa expires or that it's revoked, it doesn't determine that your ability to stay. It just, a visa is a document or a permission to enter the United States. So typically, like many of our Chinese students, their visas have expired and they can remain in the United States and continue to study, continue to work. It's just the next time they leave, they may not be able to re-enter because their visas are expired. But again, the ambiguity in the proclamation is that there is discretion given to the Department of Homeland Security to determine visa revocations. So does that mean that they might revoke visas, but students will be able to remain and there's no problem? Or are they actually talking about a process of actual deportation? I don't see that in any of the wording in the proclamation, that it's specified that it's identifying deportation. It's just visa revocation. But again, there are many questions that are being posed about clarification about the proclamation. And I think students are asking, just like in the sessions that we have during our advising and during emails, and a student posed here in the group chat, you know, what are some things that we're doing? Number one, and if I can ask my colleague, Laura Page, I know she's on here so I can continue to speak, but I did want to share, as Dr. Shirk has mentioned, there are a lot of advocacy efforts underway right now in terms of not only from the University of California system. There was a letter that was written by all 10 chancellors that was sent to the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State, advocating for continued flexibility and the continuance of the OPT program. You'll see also that many aspects of American industry, there's a document also where it was signed by over 300 different companies in the United States, again, advocating for the value that our international students and scholars and researchers and how they enhance our interests. And it's in our best interest to continue that program. So not only industry, and recently yesterday, there were some Republican senators who even advocated in terms of maintaining the OPT program. So that's where a lot of our efforts are focusing on, and do know on campus, we're such a large campus, and it may not be clear to all of you, but many of the committees and task forces truly are always thinking about how these proclamations and different policies are negatively impacting in particular, our Chinese students. And many accommodations and many things are being considered as a result of them. And I know, Anki and Cecilia, Anki from the Chinese Union and Cecilia from the Chinese Student Scholar Association, they've participated in a lot of those committees and task forces to give feedback, and giving the student experience a voice about these challenges that many students are facing. So I continue to encourage all of you, whether it's feedback forms that you're hearing about, enter that information. There's the UQs, the UC Undergraduate Education Survey. There's specifically information there about the impact of COVID-19 and all of these immigration policies. Currently, only 11% of all international students at UC San Diego have completed that survey, so it may not capture the challenges that you're all facing. So I encourage you to give your feedback, to use your voice to express that. And the campus, I know from campus leadership, from faculty to staff, truly value having you on campus. And we want to know how else we can continue to support you. It's disheartening, to be honest with you, with my own personal opinion. It's so disheartening whenever I meet with students and to just hear about your challenges of how you'll be dealing with the summer, whether you're going to be able to return. We continue, of course, to conduct webinars and record them. I know right now there's so much uncertainty, but really it's information. I think that's really what's probably key, is for you to have as much access to the current information as possible. So at a given moment, you can plan as much as you can. So I hope that answered there. And my colleague, Laura Page, just entered the ISPO link to all of those advocacy letters, you'll see numerous letters there, and that's happening behind the scenes, and U.S. citizens and the university are doing our best to make sure that that these efforts are moving forward.
And Dulce,
Great.
I just want to interject that the proclamation explicitly says it does not cover undergraduate students.
Right. Okay. So
Correct. So
we
thank you
have
for clarifying that. Yeah, it's
I
not
just-
just graduate students.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that because
you.
that's a very good point. And we have a question from the audience, Chen Han Liu. So who is going to ask? We originally scheduled this town hall for 1 hour, but I was told that we can extend this by 15 minutes. But obviously, if you have to leave, you are free to leave. But we can meet and extend this by 15 minutes. Chen Han.
Hello, my name is Chen Han Liu, and I'm a sophomore year student here at UCSD. My major is earth science and political science, and I want to comment on the U.S. China relationship and the feeling of international students. And I also have a question for Professor Shirk. And first, I want to talk about, actually we all know the U.S. China relationship is getting worse, and in probably future 5 or 10 years, if you look at the books of Professor Graham Allison, his book Destiny for War, actually we are at the edge of the society traps. But I do believe there will be no wars because there's no winners between nuclear powers. And also, but I think it's probably a lot of geopolitical contests and proxy wars happening around the globe. And as an international student, I think the greatest concern is that we don't want to be the sacrifice, among the superpower games or whatever. Actually, a lot of both countries, their leaders wants to get the divisionary incentives to stabilize their government or enhance the legitimacy. And I think, but the scapegoat will be us. So we don't want to be sacrificed. And also, I pay attention to Senator Tom Cotton. He's like pursuing to probably expel us. Just kidding. And so I think the main point is that we want to thrive from the cooperation between U.S. and China. We don't want to be sacrificed by the competition. And also, I have a question for Professor Shirk. And I read your books, and I also read some of your interviews about the U.S. strategy towards China. And just like probably half a month ago, the White House just posted a U.S. strategic approach towards PRC, and I want to know your point of view on that strategy and how will it affect U.S.-China relationship. Thank you.
So maybe I can just, there's another question that's more or less about the same thing. The question is, obviously this relationship in the short term is going to be bad, but the election is coming up in November. Will the relationship improve? Is the problem structural and will persist?
So, I want to be very succinct. This strategy document was mandated by Congress. The administration had to write this strategy document, and it's useful because it really explains what we've been seeing in terms of actions on the part of the Trump administration in many different domains. There's been an effort to call out problems with Chinese policy and to, in a sense, retaliate against China for actions that are seen as detrimental to US interests and values. So, it's a professional document, but it amounts to what a colleague of mine recently described as a kind of sledgehammer approach to U.S. China relations, which is just whack 'em across the board. And I don't agree with this. I don't think it's very effective. And I think it has the consequences of alienating public opinion in China toward the United States in a way that will be very detrimental to the future of the relationship, but also to the future of progressive changes inside China. So my view as a lifelong Democrat is that, and someone who served in the Clinton administration, that I believe that a Biden administration will continue to identify areas of Chinese policy that we believe are unfair and detrimental to US interests, but it will be more pragmatic and less ideological in the approach, and I believe more effective as well.
Okay, thank you.
Professor,
Professor,
for a second.
Jump in.
And so, I mean, you know, Graham Allison, Thucydides' Trap, Tom Cotton, these people, you know, they reflect part of reality. But there's a lot, I mean, take it with a grain of salt. There's a lot in that book that is wrong. He's wrong about what Thucydides said. He's wrong about, you know, how the relationship between France, Holland, and England developed as countries contested for hegemony. And he's wrong that the US and China are destined for war. They're not.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Bad leadership could lead us into that for sure. But you know, boy, there's a lot wrong with that book. So I'm always a little uncomfortable with the influence it has, although obviously you've read it very
I read your book as well, Professor Nando.
But that's just ego. So, but you know, I mean, Tom Cotton, somebody posted, send in the troops, Tom Cotton. This is a guy who he's very smart, but he's also very extreme. He's outside the mainstream of American
I know that.
politics. So knock on wood, maybe it won't be so bad. I mean, just to underline something Susan said, the underlying structure of the U.S. trying to recalibrate relations with China won't change under Biden. I think Susan would agree that you know, we're all going to go through this period. So it's not going to feel at first like, oh, Biden comes in, if he comes in and says, no, we're going to be nice to China, he's going to say, no, we're going to be tough. But the underlying reality of it, I think, will be much greater search for minimizing conflict, figuring out ways to cooperate, and trying to put things back on track.
okay. Graham Allison actually told me that the book's original title had a question mark there, but somehow the editor took it out. So Barry, I wonder if you can comment on another question one student raised. This is about civil-military fusion of China. And he said some aspects of that is not very different from the similar programs like DARPA in the US.
That's true in some ways, but there is a difference, right? The difference is DARPA is really tiny and it funds research, and that's all it does. Civil military fusion in China puts large sums of money into companies in order for companies to develop supply and to develop dual use technology. And so it's more disruptive, and its status in the global trading system is a little bit uncertain. WTO says you can't subsidize exports. It doesn't quite say you can't subsidize industries that then grow up to be exporters, but it's not a really big differential. So there are important differences between DARPA and civil military fusion, but not so much in the nature of the technology, but in the nature of the money and what's done with it.
Okay. So there was a question about the basic research, the future of collaboration between the US and Chinese scientists, especially in the realm of medicine, molecular biology, stem cells. should we be concerned about the direction of basic research collaboration?
Barry?
A graduate student asked that.
Well, we definitely should, but I thought maybe that was a question more for Dolce. I mean, with the research links between China and the United States are so deep. You go into every department in this university, but also every department in almost every great research university in America. And there are collaborative research projects going on with China, with Chinese faculty who are faculty at the American universities, with labs in China. It's so rich, it's so productive. Definitely the conflict between the countries is undermining the basis for that, but it's still, I mean, as of today, it's still really, really strong. But will it continue to develop? I mean, I think the issue is, are we talking about a 5 or 10% hit, or are we talking about something bigger? I don't know. Dolce, do you have a insight into how things are going with research regulations?
Yeah, I think that, again, with just the recent announcements of all the different proclamations and policies, I mean, it's beyond just an international student issue. I mean, it reaches into research, all aspects of the university. If you think about it, 2/3 of all of the postdocs at UC San Diego are international, right? We have a rich faculty and researchers that are part of that too. And I think the concern is, yes, the impact that it would have on all of these collaborations that happen not only in the United States, but just collaborations that we would have with university partners all around the world. So there is a concern about that impact as well.
I mean, I think I read a recent article about scientific and medical collaborations related to COVID. And COVID has sparked tremendous amount of collaboration, including scientists from China and from the United States and other countries. And so, you know, I think it's important to highlight how the kind of seamlessness of science, and that these collaborations are the way that we make progress. So, you know, I think I'm fairly optimistic that we can preserve much of this collaboration, but it definitely, for students in STEM fields from China, graduate students and scholars, not undergraduates at this point, it could be a challenging, you know, year or two, I'd say, in the future. But I think these collaborations will survive.
Can I jump in and answer the new question that just came in? Sure. About the couple of Chinese American or Chinese researchers have been charged with fraud for not disclosing funding from China.
But also U.S. professors, U.S. researchers.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So this is true. And it's really shocking, the sort of clumsy way it's been handled. We should point out that what these people have actually gotten in trouble for, in most cases, is not declaring the Chinese funding and being a recipient of US government funding at the same time, where you're supposed to declare it. So, I mean, the initial message is make sure you declare all your sources of funding. What doesn't get reported is that there are thousands of cases where people are getting funding from the Chinese government, especially in running labs, right? And where that's complementary to US funding and it's no problem. Now, I'd love to say, therefore, you don't have to worry. But to be honest, the enforcement wave is, you know, being carried out sometimes by people in the FBI who don't know anything about what they're doing and are clumsy and make mistakes and go too far. And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we're very worried about, and you should probably worry about too. But if it stays in the framework of what it's supposed to be, it shouldn't affect you.
Okay, here's a question from newly admitted students. And he said there are only two options in the fall to take online classes or deferment. What happens if we still can't get visa after the end of the online courses or the year's deferment? I mean, this is hypothetical. What can we do?
Maybe I'll start, and then if others want to chime in. So I think as many of you all know, so incoming first year undergraduate students and graduate students from abroad who can't attend UC San Diego or can't physically arrive in the fall can start remotely. We encourage everyone to do that because even though you aren't physically here, you can start with your cohort. You can start progress towards your degree. But we all know that's a decision that every student and their parents have to make in terms of what's best for them. What I would recommend is contacting either the undergraduate admissions office if you're trying to explore options about deferment, and also then the graduate division and of course the academic department if you're a graduate student. At this time, I'm not aware of any discussions yet about, if it extends beyond a year. I think just like what Dr. Shirk was saying, we're all hoping to be, optimistic about what will happen in a year from now in terms of admission. But anyway, just for this particular upcoming academic year, students can start remotely and then hope that they can then arrive in the winter. And if not, following up with admissions to explore your options.
All right. Any further questions from the students? And here's one that just came in. Do you have any tips on how to protect ourselves under the riots? Should we be concerned? Any campus resources for that?
We have police. I mean,
can I just jump in just to say a couple words, because in the past few days, I have engaged in all kinds of debates and in my WeChat groups with my friends from China. One of the things that I objected was characterizing what's going on as riots. And I agree that there are riot situations in all these things, but what we are seeing is across America is what I was trying to tell my friends in China, is a surge of protests and demonstrations against police brutality and the underlying racism. And in most of the cases, it was very peaceful, and so I kind of objected to them keep using that term riots and 骚乱, to characterize what's going on all over America. So in that sense, I would say, it's in a way is a great moment in American politics, right? But of course, that doesn't assuage us that if there are looters and criminals who wanted to stir up trouble and et cetera, and we need to protect ourselves, police and just being with people and not just go out alone by yourself. These are proper precautions that you can all take, as do we.
May I add a couple things?
Yeah.
So I know from just the inquiries that we're getting from our overall international students, it's either number one, similar to what was posted in the chat about, how to stay safe and how to protect themselves. But the other question too that we're getting is that they want to participate, right, in the demonstrations or to show solidarity, right, and against the police brutality or the systemic racism. I think what I would like to add is, of course, a reminder that although in the United States, we value free speech and we value being able to participate in these types of activities, international students are held under different laws and regulations. So anything where they might get arrested or that might violate their status, you are then subject to immigration then regulations. However, I do understand that some may want to participate. So what we always tell students to do is just be careful about how you do that. Try to avoid areas where that it's starting to get violent. And of course, in the area of a pandemic and social distancing, to make sure that you're also looking at your health and safety as well. And then again, if you're trying to be safe, I think being on campus, if you are on campus, is probably one of the safest places to be right now, on a campus. And just be aware of what's happening around you. I think those are just very general things I'd like to also add to the comments.
Very important word of caution for international students, that you guys do have to be a bit more careful about joining the demonstration or protest, okay? So, but with all that, I think we have already exceeded the time that we added to this town hall. I want to thank everyone for participating, and thanks to all the faculty, student leaders, and Dulce for participating in this very useful dialogue. And as you all know, the 21st Century China Center has a lot of activities and lectures and virtual activities on China and on U.S. China relations. You can go on our website, which I just posted. We have a couple of really important things coming up as well. I think on June 11th, we are, Susan Shirk will be interviewing a couple of the New York Times reporters about the situation in China and the U.S. China relations. And Sam is sharing this screen right now. And thank you all, and we'll keep in touch, and take care and stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.